Please welcome David Rubenstein, President of the Economic Club of Washington, D.C.
Welcome, everyone, to our 10th virtual event since the corona crisis began. I am very pleased today to have three distinguished guests with us. First, I'll be talking to Senator Mark Warner of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Then I'll be talking to José Andrés, who's the World Central Kitchen founder and also chef and owner of ThinkFoodGroup. And then to Schroeder Stribling, who is the Chief Executive Officer of N Street Village. I'd like to recognize our sponsors. They're on the screen that you probably can see. Bank of America, Larry DeRita, our title sponsor. Thank you, Bank of America. And I'd like to thank as well our emerging leader sponsors, PwC, Terry McClements, and Siemens USA, Barbara Humpton. And next you'll see our corporate partners on the listed on the screen. On upcoming events, we have Mark Penn, who is the managing partner of the Stagwell Group and chairman of the Harris Poll, will do a executive conversation moderated by Brian Kelly on May the 13th at 10 a.m. And Brian Kelly, of course, is editorial director and executive vice president of U.S. News and World Report, also a member of the board of the Economic Club of Washington. On Friday, May the 15th, next Friday, 10 o'clock, we'll have three other guests. Two of them we can identify right now. One is Dr. Wayne Frederick, who is the president of Howard University, and the other will be Richard Ashworth, who is the president of Walgreens and chairman of the National Association of Chain Drugstores. And we'll have a third guest that we'll identify in a couple of days, and you'll get the notice on it. On May the 19th at 5:30, we're going to have a video that honors the 53 winners of the Economic Club's scholarship program this year, and I hope you have a chance to watch that. I just would like to thank again all the first frontline healthcare professionals, first responders and servicemen and women who are working so hard under difficult conditions to help us get through the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me remind everybody that the economicclub.org is our website, and economicclub.org will be the place where you can watch the videos that we're going to do today if you want to watch them later on or let other people know about them, economicclub.org. Also, I'd like to welcome the members of the Economic Club of Chicago and Economic Club of New York who are joining us as well, and also members of the diplomatic community. So let me go to our first guest, which is Mark Warner. Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you,
Mark is in his kitchen in Alexandria. Mark, just for those who might not know Mark as well as I do, Mark is a native of Connecticut. He went to George Washington University where he got a perfect average, 4.0, and valedictorian of his class. Later went to Harvard Law School, came down and back into Washington, got involved in the cellular telephone business, formed a Columbia Capital, made some money doing that, and then ultimately got involved in government and politics and became the chairman of the Democratic Party in Virginia, and also later became governor of Virginia, and then elected senator from Virginia initially in 2018, re-elected in 2014, and he is up for election again in 2020. Mark, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Now, recently you got enormous amount of publicity for your tuna melt. I assume that the microwave behind you or the kitchen behind you is where you cook that. Why was there so much attention to a tuna melt?
Well, first of all, David, thank you for having me, and I hope that you and your family and that all of the folks who are watching this are doing okay and that their families are safe. The kind of tuna melt came about because I was getting a little quarantine crazy. This is our guest house. And my wife sends me over here each morning to kind of while away on Zoom calls. And I saw other politicians singing heartfelt songs or playing the piano or, making their mother's favorite brownie recipe. And my youngest daughter, who'd done some video work on political campaigns, said, let's do something a little more fun. And I tried to create the single grossest sandwich ever, which, truth be told, I had actually eaten before: white bread, tuna, tons of mayonnaise, 2 slices of cheese, and stick it in the microwave. And for the first day or so, not much happened. And then somehow it lit up the microwave. And fortunately or unfortunately, for a week, I got more attention on tuna melt than virtually anything I'd been doing on COVID-19.
Okay, you didn't get the recipe from Chef José Andrés, I assume.
Jose did not, although he will probably make mention of the fact that he kind of he did a follow-on video. Jose's a great friend and obviously does amazing work. But he created his much nicer version of a tuna melt as a back at me effort a week later.
So, Mark, as a member of the Senate, are you pleased with the legislation that Congress has passed today to deal with the crisis? And do you think it's sufficient, or do we need additional legislation?
Well, let's look at, first of all, the size of what has been passed. The original bill was $2.2 trillion. There was another $500 billion added on top of that. And while most of the press has reported this as a $2.7 trillion package, in reality, as you know, David, about 400 million of that first package is actually the base that leverages a 13.3 Federal Reserve Bank lending facility for another 4 trillion. So you're talking about $6.7 trillion in assistance. That's 8 times the size of TARP. Most of that was put together in 3 or 4 days. So in terms of scope of response, it's far and away the biggest response ever. In terms of the fact that it was bipartisan, both bills virtually passed unanimously, was again, I think, a recognition that that Congress knew we had to do something significant. All that capital being pushed out, though, and as we saw with the unemployment numbers today, close to 15% unemployment, 33 million Americans filing for unemployment, that this clearly has not been a stimulus. What we're trying to do is, basically keep the economy on life support. There's 3 basic directions we've done. There's direct payments that have worked out pretty well. There's greatly expanded unemployment benefits. One of the things that I supported big in a major way was, our traditional unemployment system only covers about 30% of the workforce. Gig workers, independent contractors, freelancers were not covered. They were now covered. There was also a $600 a week bump up that puts the unusual position that some people may be making in the short term more on unemployment than they made in work, and there's some moral hazard issues there. And then this small business program, which has gotten the most attention, over $600 billion that goes out to pay payroll and overhead. Well-intentioned program. The challenge with that is both in design flaw, there was not a requirement of revenue loss. There was consequently some embarrassment about public companies taking the money, and the fact that it had an 8-week length of time. You've got the absurdity in certain restaurants, and Jose will probably speak to this, where people may be furloughed. You bring them back, put them on your PPP program. You may have to refurlough them if your business can't reopen. So we're looking about extensions there. There's also things around healthcare, state support, a host of other initiatives. I think it was generally the right direction. I think maybe before we simply re-up these programs, we ought to take a step back, though, and say, is there a better way?
But you have proposed additional legislation with some other Senate co-sponsors that would in effect give people more or less their salary. Is that right?
Yes, sir. What happened was, as we look at our response, and unfortunately, the massive amounts of unemployment, and unemployment, while very generous, does not only disconnect you from your job, but also disconnects you, in many cases in our country, as you know, from health insurance. If we look at what our European friends have done, they decided, rather than this kind of massive series of new programs, they provided direct wage support, government straight to paying workers' salaries. The Danes have done that. The Germans have done it. Germans probably have done it the best. The Austrians, the Brits, and they've seen unemployment numbers only go up to about 4 to 5%. So I've proposed what I call the Paycheck Security Act, saying, let's go ahead. One, make sure a business has shown 20% revenue loss. Make sure they don't have a lot of capital on their balance sheet. And if they are really hurting, let's go ahead and pay up to 100% of $90,000 of anybody's salary. Now, I'm not sure we get that full 100% if we got through, but it would be a direct payment program to workers. It would only be for workers who are furloughed. And the Mark Zandi, the folks who make some estimates, assume while it's costly, it's about $400 billion over a quarter. That really is not much more. It could be actually less than what we've totally spent on unemployment, Medicaid expansion, and PPP.
But do you think that will pass?
David, it's a good question. There is a Pramila Jayapal, leader of the Progressive Caucus, has a proposal. In the House, I partnered with somebody I don't normally agree with, Bernie Sanders and Doug Jones, a very conservative senator in the Democratic side. Josh Hawley, a very conservative Republican senator from Missouri, has got a slightly different version of the program. And both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and as you well know, they don't agree on anything, both have said this would be a better way.
Right.
So the question is, can we move all of these recently stood up programs to kind of a new glide path? This could attach to
Right.
PPP. It would also deal with the middle market firms that have gotten no support so far. So I think it'll be thoroughly discussed. And I do think most folks would agree that if we had, the benefit of hindsight, this would have been a better approach to start with.
So the president has said he would support a fourth bill only, I think I'm quoting him correctly, if there is a payroll tax as part of that. Is there enough support in the Senate for a payroll tax, and why is there or why is there not?
Well, I think the payroll tax is not sufficient. The payroll tax might have been a good idea at the beginning again, but the payroll tax right now presumes you've got people on payroll. And that payroll tax, is a minimum amount of assistance when we're talking about people going from, down with the revenues down 70, 80, 90%. If people have already been furloughed or put on unemployment, cutting a payroll tax does not really provide much help. And obviously the payroll taxes to a degree help pay for the long-term issues around Social Security, FICA, those issues. So I don't think the payroll tax, and it was fairly broadly dismissed even by a lot of my Republican colleagues as too little too late.
So if there is a fourth bill with your bill in part of it or some other features, do you think that'll happen within the next month or two, or how long do you think it'll be before there's a fourth bill?
I think that, let's hope the economy's reopening. I mean, the president put me on as reopening task force, and I want the economy to reopen, although we desperately need more testing. Testing is critical, and I'm been bitterly disappointed by the administration's failure to organize PPE, and that was been enough of a disaster. If we don't organize testing and have the same kind of competition, state against state, hospital against hospital, that will both have huge economic as well as medical issues. I do think the next bill will not happen in the next week. I think it could happen. I definitely think if it happens, it'll happen before the end of May. And in addition to either my approach or replenishing some of the existing programs, I do think even if we were to replenish, we realize you can't have an 8-week cliff on PPP. I do think there'll be other areas like broadband, which we underinvested in, and I've got some major ideas there. I'd like to experiment with some portable benefit programs. One of the things I hope we've learned is that the wide swaths of our society that weren't covered by unemployment or have no benefits right now, I'd love to make sure that no matter what kind of work you do in America, you earn some benefits along the way. And who manages those? It doesn't have to be government. It could be private sector. It could be a jump ball. But we shouldn't have, again, the circumstance where we've got 50% of our society losing a job and have nothing to fall back upon.
So everybody seems to be in favor of infrastructure. Nobody's against more infrastructure, but why does Congress not pass an infrastructure bill?
Well, previously, there was lots of interest in infrastructure, but the president was never willing to put forward a pay for it. Now we're in this moment in time where, again, directly appropriated 2.7 trillion, 4 trillion more in Federal Reserve lending. There may be a moment that says, okay, we need to do that trillion or $2 trillion infrastructure program, and we might not be able to do dollar for dollar pay for. I think the truth is both political parties have lost all credibility on debt and deficits. So maybe if we're going to do some more spending, infrastructure clearly, and I would put broadband as a critical component of that.
So now you mentioned before a word not often used in the Congress these days, bipartisan. So do you think the Senate is more bipartisan than it was before the COVID-19, or do you think it's basically the same?
Well, listen, I think the optics to the public is people snapping at each other, and McConnell puts out a position, Schumer puts out something, and the kind of back and forth. I know makes my head hurt and probably most of your viewers' heads hurt. I find, at one step below, as we're actually talking about and working through these ideas, whether it's my Paycheck Security Act, whether it's broadband, whether it's a portable benefits legislation, every one of these ideas I'm working with Republican colleagues. And I do think there was this moment, and it was fascinating to see that week that we passed the major legislation, where from the weekend when people knew things were a little bit weird to the middle of the week when I think the seriousness of the virus hitting our country, it was driven home, that the Senate actually did work. There were 96 senators there. They all voted for the bill. A week later, we all passed the bill by unanimous consent. For as dysfunctional as the place that I work in is, right. It was a pretty good sign. I think it was a moment of common sense over partisanship.
Now, what about the debt? We're adding lots of debt, maybe $3, $4, $5 trillion of additional debt to an already $21 or $22 trillion debt that we have. Are you not worried about the inflationary impact of that, or how we're going to pay this off at some point?
Well, David, as you recall, back in the mid 2000s, I was probably known as the leading Senate debt Cassandra. I put together a so-called gang of six. We'd worked on the plan called Simpson-Bowles. We came close a couple of times on, leveling off some entitlement spending and, raising additional revenue. Frankly, all of that argument went away when we never saw interest rate hikes, and when my Republican colleagues went ahead and did a $2 trillion tax cut, totally unpaid for. So yes, I do believe the debt that now is close to more like $26 to $27 trillion in total, just the interest rates on that could be crushing. But the fact that we have seen this kind of new normal without rates rising, and then, I think Steve Pearlstein, who writes for the Post, is a very smart economics writer. He wrote a great piece about 6 or 8 weeks ago that at least gave me some caution that in this moment of crisis, if we don't spend at extraordinary rates, our actually debt could be worse. But I do think longer term, we're leaving our kids with a balance sheet that's pretty far out of whack.
So when do you think the Commonwealth of Virginia will be able to open up? You obviously are close to the governor. You talk to him. What do you think he's thinking, and when do you think it's safe to open up?
Well, he's, as the only doctor as a governor, I think he's going to, unlike many, follow the healthcare recommendations of the professionals. He's talked about kind of entering into first stage, I believe, on the 8th, and that's coming up Monday, I believe, or it may even be today. And I think he's going to do a first phase. I've urged him. He's been trying to think about reopening Virginia at once. I actually think he needs to do it on more regional basis. Clearly, in Northern Virginia, I think it would be the smartest to do that reopening in concert with DC and Maryland, because our DMV region may have a different opening routine than Southwest Virginia. I think one of the things we're all watching, though, at least I am, and I think many folks are, is, and I hope it does not bode poorly for example, the folks in Georgia, where the Georgia governor was so aggressive about reopening, even to the opposition of Trump. So they're kind of the canary in the coal mine, of reopening and seeing what happens with in that state. Because my fear, I say this as a former governor, I'd like to get the economy reopened. Right. But boy, if you get people back out and you see a spike and you lose folks' confidence, that second reopening is going to be exponentially harder.
Now, Mark, you are the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Are you worried that there is going to be foreign interference in the 2020 elections?
Well, David, let me answer that in two ways. First of all, I've been extraordinarily concerned that this president, who has completely disrespected the intelligence community from day one, is increasingly politicizing the intelligence community leadership. The person he's got now is an acting director. Ambassador Grinnell has no experience. He is simply a partisan hack. The individual that is up, Congressman Ratcliffe, again, does not have much experience. And I'm fearful that our intelligence professionals, which their job is to speak truth to power. Literally every person that this president appointed inside the office of the director of national intelligence, he has fired because they've done their job, because they've told him things he didn't want to hear. So I'm afraid, yes, that the Russians will try to interfere. And two, I'm afraid that if our intelligence community doesn't feel like they can still be independent, they may not sound the early enough warning because of fear of losing their own jobs. So that, in a time when our eyes are distracted by the national emergency around COVID, could allow a Russia, a China, or others to play a lot of mischief in an election system, in an election season.
Now, speaking of China, is there anything you can tell us about what the Intelligence Committee may know about whether it was a wet market or a lab that released, intentionally or not, the COVID-19 virus?
Well, let me again, this is an area that I've spent a lot of time on over the last 2.5 years. And I have, just as the president does, extraordinarily concerns about the Communist Party in China and about President Xi Jinping and his aspirations. I think it's important to note, though, that my beef is with the Communist Party of China, not with China as a nation, not with the Chinese people, certainly not with Chinese Americans. And I sometimes fear the president's kind of broad brush, racist, almost xenophobic attacks doesn't make that distinction. It was very believable to me when there was first some of these stories, since the Chinese government were so opaque about letting outside experts in, that this virus could have been sourced somewhere other than the so-called wet market. But all of the intelligence that we've had to review has had no basis for that. The intelligence has been very similar to what has been in the public domain, that this originated, was not man-made, that it appeared to originate in the market. If the president or the Secretary of State has any real intelligence that shows otherwise, I think he is under an obligation to show that to the so-called Gang of Eight, the chair and ranking members of the intelligence committees, as well as the leadership. And Richard Burr, my chairman, and I feel exactly the same way. And we have basically said, if you got information, you got to show it to us. Okay. That is absolutely his requirement. You can't go around making these bold statements that he has intel and not at least share it with the oversight committees.
So the Democratic National Convention is supposed to be held this summer. Do you think it'll be completely virtual, or will actually people show up?
David, I don't have the foggiest notion. I mean, again, my hope is that into this month we'll be making enough progress that we can see reopening. I would urge people not to make rash decisions about cancellation too early. I say that with a daughter that I hope is going to go to business school in the fall. But as somebody pointed out, I'm not sure political conventions still give the same boost. I mean, they're a good party generally, but I'm not sure they give the candidates necessarily the boost that they used to give.
So how are senators staying healthy? Senators on average are probably older than the average American. And so they are probably a little more subject to getting this disease or virus. Are they shaking hands anymore? Are they wearing masks? What are they doing?
Well, David, at 65, I work in the only place in America where I'm still one of the young guys. So it is a little bit weird, to see the Senate react. I think for the most part, with the exception of somebody like Rand Paul, who is kind of off on his own without wearing a mask. This is the same guy who didn't tell his colleagues that he had the virus or had been tested for the virus. Virtually everybody else is pretty good about wearing masks. I know no handshaking. Burr and I were greeting the nominee for Director of National Intelligence with elbow bumps the other day, made the front page of the Post. And for the most part, one of the things that is pretty remarkable about the senators, even though they are a number of them in their 80s, that just the nature of this job means when you're up on the Hill, you're walking a couple miles a day, even with the subway cars as you move from meetings to meetings and from the Senate floor back to your office. So I've been pretty impressed that for
Okay.
the most part, center's in pretty good shape.
So what are you doing with your family? You have three daughters. Are your daughters and your wife with you? And are you self-isolating mostly together, or they get tired of being with their parents?
Well, they definitely get tired of being with their parents. My 25-year-old youngest daughter says it feels like high school all over again in terms of eating meals together. But I've got two of them here that are safe. My third is with her boyfriend. They were in New York and they went down to our farm. So they got out and have had a nice 7 weeks out of the city. So yeah, listen, I'm very fortunate. I've got the resources and my family is all safe. It's one of the reasons why I hope that everybody who's viewing this can say the same. I know, as I'm sure you do, I've had friends who've had the virus very bad, and it's a pretty awful circumstance to go through.
So final question, Mark. Do you expect to be the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee after the next election?
I hope I am the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and if I'm the chairman, what I'll continue to do is the same thing I've done as vice chairman, which is I'm really proud of that committee. It is I would argue, the last fully bipartisan functioning committee. Matter of fact, as it's not in the attention of everybody right now, but we came out with our 4th volume on our Russia investigation report, still 100% bipartisan. You know, the questions around China, we do in a bipartisan way. I really, truly believe our intelligence professionals need the support of Congress, but they don't go in as Democrats or Republicans, and neither should we.
Mark, I'm going to let you go back to your tuna melt, and thank you very much for your time and your service. Thank you.
Well, David, thank you. And again, I just want to give a shout out as well. I know Jose's going to be on. He's doing some remarkable work. I know there's a group of our technology leaders around Washington that are doing a No Kid Hungry, raising $1 million for that charity. I do hope those of us who have the ability, particularly with so many people going through some of the toughest times, and we have so much food anxiety at this point, if we can support that No Kid Hungry or support Jose's efforts, I think those would be good things to do. And again, thank you so much, David.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to talk to José Andrés. José is touring around Virginia somewhere now. I think he was in his car when I saw him earlier. José, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi. All right, so where are you physically right now?
I am in Virginia Beach. I wake up early, I made bread, and then I began driving to Virginia Beach from Bethesda, Maryland. And I'm right now, in the back, I have this beautiful church, the New Jerusalem Church, which they are doing an amazing work here with all types of families, Puerto Ricans, Latinos, Afro-Americans. And this is one of the main centers we have in Virginia for food distribution.
So for people that don't know you, there are people that may not know you as well as I do, or how did you decide to get out of the world of just being a chef, which is a very honorable thing to do, and get into the world of feeding people who are hungry? What motivated you to do that?
I always said that I feed the few, but we cannot have restaurants without making sure that nobody else is hungry. It feels very awkward to me that I'm feeding caviar and foie gras, and 2 streets down from where I have my restaurant is guys that families that they don't know what they're gonna put on the table. So I always said that if Clara Barton during the Civil War, in that little building across my restaurant, was able to create the most amazing system to provide relief to the bonded soldiers during the Civil War, if a nurse was able to do that over a century ago, a cook like me should be able to achieve the same success on feeding the hungry in emergencies. So that's why I feed the few and I try to help feed the many.
So now you have a number of restaurants around the United States and elsewhere. Are they all closed now or not?
Okay, I am one of the first ones that said I was closing my restaurant, especially in DC, but I am the first one that said I'm closing the restaurant, but I'm opening community kitchens. So they are technically closed, but the community kitchen means we are doing takeout, we are doing delivery, we are using the restaurants to feed homeless. We are partnering obviously with World Central Kitchen to make sure that in DC, in LA, in Las Vegas, my restaurants are at the service of providing food relief.
Now, people in the United States are familiar with, I guess, food banks and where people go and they get cans of food and so forth. But you are actually cooking meals for people. Is that right?
We're doing a couple, 2 or 3 things. One is usually in an emergency, World Central Kitchen comes and begins cooking in a kitchen we're able to rent or get. Or we do a field kitchen if it was total destruction. But right now we have 800,000 restaurants and millions of people in the food business that they are out of jobs. So if we need to cover the humanitarian problem, why we don't put those restaurants to take care of the needs of the hungry? That's what we've been doing, and that makes a lot of sense.
So one of your programs has been to get chefs and cooks who are not working now to be part of World Central Kitchen. Is that right?
Yep. We have right now more than 1,000 restaurants across America that they do anywhere between 100 and 1,000 meals each. And we are using those restaurants in partnership with local community leaders, churches, mayors to cover the needs one city at a time, one restaurant at a time.
I see. Now, where are you getting the money to finance all this? Or people want to give you money, where do they give it to you? Is that what you're seeking, mostly money? And is it government money or private sector money?
No government money becomes complicated and becomes very slow. And we are a quick organization. So yeah, we own it to many individuals that they give us from $1 to like Mayor Bloomberg that gave us $6 million and other generous individuals. Obviously, I believe this should be taken care of by the federal government. Why? Because this is a national humanitarian food emergency. So that's why I've been pushing Congress very heavily to say, guys, this is a problem that shouldn't be a problem. And you have the tools to make sure that you support our ideas, the ideas that World Central Kitchen is putting forward to make sure that no American will be hungry through this pandemic.
So where is the greatest problem in the United States right now, or is it everywhere in the United States? There's no one place that's worse than the other.
Well, we need to remember that the problem was already before the pandemic. We have 40 million Americans that they are food insecure. If they are food insecure, in a moment like this, even becomes a worse scenario. Because right now we have millions of people joining the unemployment ranks. And on top of that, we have many undocumented that as they lose their jobs, because they are undocumented, they are not able to be receiving any assistance from their cities or their states in some places. So the problem has multiplied. And that's why the problem is all around. We are in more than 150 cities right now, from Oakland to Virginia Beach, to Harlem and Bronx, Newark, Elizabeth, LA, Little Rock, Arkansas. Everywhere they have their problems. And we are here trying to cover the blind spots of the system.
So you're the CEO of World Central Kitchen, you're the chief chef, you're the chief everything. What is your main role? You run everything, or you're...
No anymore. I'm the founder, and I'm one more soldier with boots on the ground. The CEO is great, Nate Mook. He is a longtime friend of mine. He was the guy that came with me to Puerto Rico in Maria. We created the system there to do more than 4 million meals in Puerto Rico. I am the founder. I am in the board, but I'm even trying to move myself away from the board. So that's what I do. I make sure that I am like here. I try to go places. I try to see the problem on my own. So when I speak to senators or congressmen or to people like you, I can speak with knowledge of the situation. If not, everything else is theory. Me, I can tell you what's going on in America.
When do you expect you'll be able to open some of your restaurants, and how will you open them differently? Will everybody have to have a mask, and how will it be different than before when you open?
Listen, I am sitting on the advisory board of Mayor Bowser. I think I have a very unique experience on this because I have experience on feeding people under cholera situations in Haiti and Mozambique. And World Central Kitchen, we've been feeding people on Corona since Yokohama, when the Princess cruise ship was there with 6,000 people. And we began the feeding system to make sure that our teams will be healthy and everybody will be healthy. So I want to protect my teams. That's why I close so early. I think I'm not going to be, even if they give me permission to reopen by the city or by the president, I will, at the end, make my own call when I feel it's safe. When it's safe, well, what happened with what Mayor Bloomberg is doing in New York with contact tracing? Why we don't have the most powerful country in the history of mankind, with the biggest technology at our disposal in the history of mankind, why we don't have already a very simple system where we know who is sick, we know through our phones who is been in contact with, and we are able to quarantine ourselves, making sure that we minimize the pandemic spread? Why we don't use technology to make sure that we can all feel safe as we keep the economy going? Because we have a true lack of leadership. And I don't mean only government. I sense a lack of leadership everywhere, from UN all the way to governments. If we will have contact tracing, I could be open, because I knew that anybody coming in my restaurant will have a big chance of knowing if he was infected or not. Because we don't have anything like that, I'm gonna be super, super careful, and I'm gonna open when I feel like my city and anywhere else that we are not gonna be part of the problem by spreading the virus. So I don't know when to open.
How do restaurants like yours and restaurant owners like yours survive? Because you're not getting any revenue now. You have some fixed costs, I assume. I assume it's a terrible financial burden. Are you trying to get Congress to pass legislation? We get insurers to reimburse restaurants?
I've been myself in many wars already. Is one very interesting thing going, that is the independent restaurant coalition, which we feel independent restaurants, small businesses across America. We are close to 400, 500,000 independent restaurants that we feel like PPP, while I believe it was a nice idea by Congress, by the White House at the beginning, and I'm happy it was kind of bipartisan. To a degree, they put so many structures that is actually not serving, helping the restaurants. If at the end of the day we don't have business, why any small business is going to have any employees? That's why we pay taxes, and that's why we have unemployment. The businesses should have money to make sure that you are able to maintain the minimum team to operate and get ready for reopening. I think the government should be taking care, like has happened in Europe, of every single employee with a good paycheck, so they don't have a problem of losing their homes or being thrown out their home because they don't pay rent and have money to buy food, etc. But then support the businesses to reopen when it's the right time. I hope PPP is some people now negotiating. We are many negotiating White House in Congress to make sure that will help the small business community by not being so restrictive in the regulations and rules they've imposed on those grants-loans.
So if somebody wants to help World Central Kitchen, what can they do?
Well, number one, I'm going to be telling them, what do you want your money in the bank for? Just put the money up to help the people. Bring America back to work. So our organization like World Central Kitchen, we are doing, again, we are beyond 5 million. We are about to reach 6 million. We are doing almost 250,000 meals a day. Before you send us $1, we are already spending it, and we are helping everybody in the process. Hiring cooks, reopening restaurants, paying the farmers, everybody benefits. So go to www.wck.org, wck.org, and donate. Every dollar counts.
How much are you trying to raise?
We are spending around between $500,000 and $1 million a day, almost as an average.
I see.
So do your numbers. That's why we have this bill that is bipartisan, where was done by Congressman Thompson of California, McGovern of Massachusetts, and supported by Congressman Davis of Illinois, a Republican, bipartisan on the House. And I was able to get Kamala Harris supported it on the Senate, and then was great because we brought in Senator Scott of South Carolina, Republican too. Democrats and Republicans breaking bread on a bill that is going to put restaurants at work, as the restaurants, in partnership with NGOs like us, through the governors and mayors, they can take care of the local needs. That's a brilliant, simple idea that I hope will pass, and I hope Congress, FEMA, and governors and mayors will use to tackle the problems that they may have in their communities.
Hey, Jose, how are you staying healthy? Because you're traveling around now, you got to meet lots of people. How are you staying healthy?
Well, I wear my masks every day. I wear my gloves. I wash myself before I come into my house twice a day with a hose, with liquid, with sanitizer. All our teams, remember that we were the first people, World Central Kitchen, that I did the HACCP, the health code of how to behave in restaurants. For me, it's very important that my teams are healthy through this pandemic. And I cross fingers. We've been blessed. But let me tell you one thing that is wrong. I heard Senator Warner, and we see everybody doing it, Vice President Pence. They're telling us that if we cough, we should cough on our elbow, like this. But then you see everybody bumping elbows. Are we nuts? We should not be touching each other. We should use at the most do this in the heart. That should be the new sign. People are putting their viruses in their elbow and then they're hitting elbows. This doesn't make any sense. So it's little things like this that if we realize that we are fighting a small virus that can make everybody of us sick, I think we will be slightly less effusive. We don't need to touch each other. Only touch your family members that live with you in your household. Everybody else, to love each other, is staying away from each other.
Now, what about your family, your children? Are they all staying in your home in Bethesda? Are you sort of self-isolating there?
Everybody's there. We're very blessed. We have a nice size house, quite frankly. I fear, I'm more, my thoughts are always with the people that I know. They live 10 people in a one studio apartment in Harlem, in so many other places, in public housing. So I'm blessed in that sense. My daughters help me sometimes to deliver food to some hospitals, but I make sure they have minimum contact. My daughters go usually to pick up food downtown to the Nationals Stadium, where we have a big operation there in Washington, D.C. I always love to activate stadiums in big emergencies. And from there, my daughters are delivering, for example, every day to the children's hospital inside the NIH, where it's like 30, 40 children there going through treatment and staying there in this kind of hotel, which is beautiful. So my daughters, for example, are volunteering doing that.
Now, with your daughters, there's a video that's on the internet that basically has you cooking some eggs and putting ice cream on top of it. Is that a healthy thing to eat?
It's totally healthy. It's nothing healthier than eggs. Look at me. I'm the perfect example of healthiness, overweight healthiness, but healthiness. So yeah, and the best one is the one I did 2 days ago, which I made the scrambled eggs using a blowtorch. Yes, this pandemic is making our creativity blow. Remember that Newton became the most creative under a pandemic when he was also in quarantine. So I think out of this pandemic, the good thing is that we're going to have brilliant minds coming with brilliant ideas. Just wait and see.
All right. Well, Jose, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. Thank you for what you're doing for the country and the world. And stay healthy, because we need you to stay healthy.
I will be healthy. I am very aware of the situation. I had some family members that died in Spain. My mother was a nurse. My father was a nurse. I have many friends in hospitals right now in America and in Spain fighting this pandemic. That's why it's so important that we all keep healthy so we keep our nurses and doctors healthy, and so we can forget about this virus, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, now we're going to have the CEO of N Street Village, Schroeder Stribling. Schroeder, can you hear me?
David, I can hear you.
Okay, so Schroeder, for those people that don't know what N Street Village is, can you tell us what it actually is? I should have introduced you more appropriately, saying that you've been the CEO, I think, since 2010. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you are a graduate of Wellesley and Georgetown. Is that right?
I went to the Georgetown Nonprofit Leadership Program, yes.
And you also are you a native of New York?
I sure am.
Okay, so tell us what N Street Village is and then how you have decided to change it a bit to deal with COVID-19 challenges.
Okay. Well, first of all, David, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be on with you this morning and to talk about this and the important things that are going on. And thank you especially to be in this nice company with Senator Warner and Chef Andres, although I have to say I feel slight pressure to come up with a unique recipe and put it out on social media. So I'll have to deal with that afterward. But I also appreciate the opportunity because we have a lot of frontline workers, of course, at N Street Village. And so this is a chance for me to say thank you very publicly to our frontline workers who go to work every day in our shelter and our supportive housing programs, doing extraordinary work under unusual, unprecedented circumstances. N Street Village is a nonprofit organization that is almost 50 years old, and we provide housing and supportive services for homeless and low-income women and affordable housing for families. We have 5 locations in Washington, D.C. We provide all types of housing, from shelter all the way through permanent and supportive housing, which is when folks have special needs or disabilities in their housing. And we also provide wraparound services for everyone, including health and vocational services, and we do advocacy. We facilitate lifting up the voices of the people that we serve. They are the people that we need to be listening to. And we advocate around the issues of importance to those that we serve. We serve about 2,000 women every year, and still to this day, at least one new woman comes to our doors for the very first time.
So COVID-19 has changed things for you in which way? Because you have to do things much more carefully than before, presumably. Is that right?
It's changed everything. We recognized early on that we were going to have to shift our operations very quickly so that we could manage the health of the people that we serve and our staff to the best of our ability. So we went to an essential duties protocol where all the women that we were serving previously are still being served, but some of the other services are not available at this time. They'll come back online when we're able to. We're protecting people's health. We're working with our government, our city partners, our peer provider partners. Everyone is collaborating rapidly to adapt to the health guidance and to keep folks safe. We've had a lot of people that have gone to the isolation and quarantine that's been provided. Our city has done a good job of finding isolation and quarantine locations to try to manage contagion in dense environments like shelters.
In Washington, D.C., how many homeless people are there, is it estimated?
We do a count every year, once a year, and it's called a point-in-time count. It's a snapshot piece of data. It's not annualized. In 2019, the night that we did it, and we always do it the same night, the longest night of the year in January, cold at night, there were about 6,500 people who were homeless in Washington, D.C. So that's one night. And most of the people who are homeless stay in shelter. It's about maybe 10% or so that stay on the street.
And when they are on the street, why are they on the street rather than go to a shelter? What's the advantage to them of doing that?
Well, sometimes it's by choice. people may have circumstances, they may have pets or partners, and they may not be able to find a place that can accommodate them. They may be, there may be mental health issues. They may feel afraid of going into shelter, or they may have been traumatized. That's very common, and feel afraid of going into shelter. We work hard, and we also have laws in DC for right to shelter that are more aggressive than elsewhere. We work hard to make sure that people have, everyone who has shelter needs it.
Is it estimated there are more women than men who are homeless, or more men than women?
More men.
More men.
Yeah, more men. About a quarter, give or take, if you, and this is true here and across the country, of our women, of the single adult homeless population. But David, you asked me about what coronavirus was going to do to us, and I want to answer that question more fully and say that in addition to managing the health directly of the people that we serve and of our staff and supporting our staff through this crisis, what I really believe the most significant thing coronavirus is going to do for N Street Village and for the people we serve and the advocacy issues that we and our public partners and many folks in this group and elsewhere care about is that this virus will bring a 3-alarm sound to the 3-alarm blaze of economic inequality that many of us have been watching for a long time and have been very worried about. And I think when the tide rolls out, just as we heard Jose talking about, just as we heard Senator Warner talking about, the inequality was pre-existing, it will be worse. And so we're very concerned about the downstream effects. So not only the people that we're serving now, but what about, the leading indicators that we see of the tripling of food insecurity issues, or the rent payment, the leading indicator of rent payments going down. We know that we're going to face a tide of new need.
So the homeless people, the women that come into your shelters, for example, are they there for a month, longer, shorter? And do people gravitate away from homeless to go to more traditional kind of living arrangements, or not?
I have never met anyone who is homeless who didn't want to not be homeless. Sometimes people want to live with other people in a group setting, but they don't want to be homeless. And so I would say everyone is aiming for that. The biggest problem is that we live in a city where rents and wages still diverge so greatly and continue to. Homelessness, for the most part, is an economics problem. We live in we live in one of the hot spots. We live in one of the cities where a lot of the people, if you work full time, you can't afford to live there, which I think many of us find has been a moral hazard issue for a long time. And I love to hear Senator Warner talk about how when we come back from this crisis, can we not only come back from this crisis okay, not just rebuild, but can we redesign? Are there better ways to do things?
So if somebody wants to support N Street Village, what do they do?
Well, I would say that there are two things to do. There are two ways to get active. And the first way to get active is what you're already doing, and what I want to thank you for, and I want to thank everyone here for your interest in, is to be aware, to be ready, to be engaged, to be thinking about these things. Because I really believe that we need to build an overwhelming public support for the notion that economic inequality and structural racism is unacceptable to us, and that we see it, and that we're going to have all vectors of our society become involved in it. So to that extent, big A, activism and advocacy, where in the circles that you are, and supporting things like what Senator Warner was talking about, which are perfect examples of how we can redesign and come back better. The other thing is, little A active, come to N Street Village. You can't come virtually right now and come in reality later. nstreetvillage.org. Lots of ways to get involved, get active, become a donor. We'd love to have you.
So you do accept financial contributions?
Yes, indeed, we accept financial contributions. contributions. In fact, we're reliant on financial contributions. We would not be able to serve the 2,000 women every year we do. We have half of our income, half of our program operations are dependent on this.
So you get in donations a year. How much money do you get a year from donations from?
About $4.5 million.
$4.5 million. Now you were going to have a fundraising event with José Andrés, I guess that.
Yes, we were.
Right.
We were. Hola, Jose, if you're still there. Hasta pronto, I hope. We hope to reschedule sometime. Jose is friends, and we have mutual friends, and he's graciously agreed to support N Street Village, and we're looking forward to a time that we can do that. And I'm so grateful because we share. Here's your sign, Jose, for how we greet each other now. I'm very grateful.
So the main message you would like to give to people about N Street Village, to people that are not familiar with it, is basically what?
That homelessness is a crisis in our city, that it is solvable, that we need everyone to be involved in the solutions, and that we would love for you to come and get involved in the conversation at N Street Village. Okay.
Thank you very much for that message. Thank you for appearing with us, and best of luck on what you're doing. Thank you.
For having me.
So I'd like to conclude our program today by just saying thank you to all of you who have participated and all of you who are watching or listening. And I want to thank our sponsors as well. And to remind everybody, there will be another program like this next Friday, and there'll be an executive conversation before that with Mark Penn earlier next week. Thank you all. Have a good day.